Okay, so I became a filmmaker in college. I always wanted to be a filmmaker. My dad is an actor, and had done a lot of short parts growing up, and I was, we were always watching movies, always wanted to be a filmmaker. I didn't know I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker until I got to college, and I went to Oberlin College, and the two teachers that were my mentors were a documentary filmmaker and an experimental filmmaker, so I started making experimental documentary film, and that kind of became my, really kind of defined my path. After college, I got invited to come back to Oberlin to work as a fellow, as a part of Storylens Pictures, and I was me and actually the co-director of FIREBOYS, Drew Dickler, her and I were the inaugural Storylens Fellows, and we were charged with making short films about complex societal problems or social issues with a very social justice lens about communities in Northeast Ohio. So Oberlin College in Northeast Ohio. I was living in Cleveland at the time, and Drew was living in Oberlin, and our two professors from college were the executive producers of Storylens. So in that program, I made 5 short films with Drew. The first was about mass incarceration. It's called 100 Second Chances. It's about a restaurant reentry program called Edwin's Restaurant and Leadership Institute, Edwin's Restaurant and Leadership Institute in Cleveland, and they do remarkable things. They've trained people in the prisons and then after prison to get jobs in the culinary industry and hospitality, and working within area restaurants in Cleveland, getting them placed at like a 90% hiring rate, and it was a great tool for combating recidivism. And that sort of opened my eyes to reentry in the complex sort of patchwork of the American justice system, and just how little justice is actually in that. And then I was working on other short films about the opiate epidemic and unhoused children and police brutality and violence and gun violence following the death of Tamir Rice. And we worked with his classmates actually in doing a story. And so my work as like a social justice filmmaker was kind of born, and I wanted to continue to pursue that. So kind of at that same time, it was like 2014, 2015, I got invited to go to a prison and film Jonathan Demme, the late humanist filmmaker Jonathan Demme, go to a prison and show one of his films. So I was documenting him talk to this group of men at a prison, not really knowing what was going on kind of at this facility. And after the talk, he leaves. He's like, all right, Jake, I gotta go take a flight. And he leaves, and I'm sitting there packing up all my gear. And these guys start talking to me, and they're asking me questions about, how did I get started? How did I learn how to do this? What kind of work do I do? And I was telling them about some of the work I recently had done in social justice, and they were like, well, come look at our stuff. And they opened the next door, and there's a whole editing suite, and there's like 8 computers, and I've learned that these guys are running a TV studio that's in this prison, and they're producing original content. They're developing really like stories about nonprofits and reentry resources, and at the same time, they're making propaganda for the state prison system. And they kind of wanted to ask me these questions and wanted to learn about what I was doing and wanted to show me their work. So we were kind of workshopping all this stuff, and next thing I know, I'm there for like 3.5 hours, and I go to the volunteer coordinator. I was like, can I come back? And he's like, yeah, we'll get you a volunteer pass. And I stayed in that prison for 4 years working with those men. And helping them develop their skills, learning about their lives. They were my community. They were my friends. Like, I spent more time there than I did really anywhere else. I was going multiple times a week, supporting other organizations that were coming and going, and meeting a lot of interesting people and doing a lot of storytelling and a lot of teaching. And so I was sort of involved very deeply in sort of in this incarcerated community. I worked at the women's prison that was in Cleveland as well. And I was researching criminal justice stories and was learning about just how much mass incarceration was like the civil rights struggle of our time, and wanted to get involved. I was just educating myself to the history and the complexity and some of the challenges and problems in the legislation and the new issues, and I was reading a lot. And that was 2014 was about the same time that Neil Barsky started the Marshall Project, which was a criminal justice news agency dedicated to really just roundtable. It was rounding up of a lot of criminal justice news from a lot of other outlets, and they started making their own content, doing their own stories, and it really expanded. I was really following it from the beginning, and one of these stories came up about incarcerated firefighters in California getting paid $1 to $2 an hour to risk their lives alongside CAL FIRE firefighters to address the seasonal fires in California. And I was like, well, this is interesting. I've never heard anything like this before. This is getting framed as prison labor exploitation. It's also rehabilitative. There's this side of it which is really oppressive, and there's a side of it that's actually very historical. They've been doing this for 75 years in California. I had no idea that prisoners were fighting fires. And so I contacted the journalist who wrote that article from the Marshall Project, and I was like, well, it's interesting. I've made some short films. I've done something about mass incarceration. I'm interested in doing more stories like this. Can you help me get access? So he introduced me to the Public Information Office in California, and sort of that's how that journey began into actually getting access to the fire camps to tell the story of FIREBOYS. And it wasn't right away that I wanted to tell a story about the youth who were fighting fire. Right after I contacted him, a story popped up about a fire camp, is what they call these places, where the incarcerated firefighters are trained, housed in sort of these open dorms. So they're trained by CAL FIRE. They live in these dorms. When fire season happens, they go out on crews between 15 and 18 people, right alongside CAL FIRE, like right there on the front lines, as hand crews. So they're using hand tools, chainsaws, and they're cutting fire line, which is scraping back any vegetation, cutting down trees down to bare mineral soil. So when the wildfires burn to that edge of their fire line, it goes out. So wildland firefighting isn't really done with water as much. It's really hand tools, and they call it cutting. So they're literally scraping the ground to just get down to dirt, because dirt doesn't burn. It's a really effective way of fighting fire, and it's actually a really, really hard work, and it's still what they do today to address the seasonal blazes that are happening right now. Okay, so I hear this story. I find this other story about incarcerated firefighters in Seattle, and the story is really focusing on a fire camp that is staffed by juveniles, 18 to 22-year-olds. And there was an escape. And this guy had run off the camp and had beat up a guard, took his gun, ran off into the woods, and shot himself. Didn't die, but he sort of created a stir, and they started looking at the system, the juvenile camps, and said, we're shutting them all down. So I went back to that. I contacted the journalist again who wrote the first article, and I said, hey, does California have any juvenile fire camps? This is a thing that exists. And he's like, yeah, actually there's one left. It's called Pine Grove. It's just east, it's about an hour and a half east of Sacramento, and it's still been running, and it's sort of it's the only fire camp that's available for the youth. They're coming out of the Department of Juvenile Justice in California, which has been reduced significantly since like 2011. It used to be like 10,000 youth. Now it's down to under 900. They've done incredible reforms. California was sort of a leader in criminal justice reform. I felt like they'd be open to something like this. There was this trend going on around 2013, 14, where a lot of state prison systems were trying to become more progressive by putting rehabilitation in their title. So it's like the Ohio Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, the California Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, and they were creating these models of not restorative justice, but they were doing more workforce training, they were doing more parole opportunities, and the fire camps happened to be one of these parole opportunities. So they were allowing people to opt into the fire camps, work with CAL FIRE, get a reduced sentence, and leave prison early, and ostensibly move on with their lives. So I contacted the Public Information Office, and I wrote them a proposal. I sent them the film I made as a Storylens fellow about the prison, the restaurant that was doing reentry work, and a little bit of a blurb about what I'd like to do. And it turned out they were really proud of these programs. They really wanted to show them off. So it was a interesting time, because no one had done a story about this. No one had really done a film about any of these, and they were very, very hesitant to let filmmakers in. So I was pitching them a short film. I was doing it, I was 25. I was very enthusiastic, and also I was kind of speaking the right language at the time. I was talking about rehabilitation. They were really just trying to actualize that within their prison system, because it was trendy at the same time. They were getting a lot of pressure from the state and nonprofits to do it. So it became kind of an open door situation where they let us in. They had somebody shadow us as we were interviewing the youth. And I thought we were just going to make a short film about this cool, interesting corner of the prison system that, could help reveal something about the nature of rehabilitation and really challenge some of the prison labor exploitation that was happening in the prisons. And this was like one area where I was seeing that these guys were working as professionals. They were trained as Type 1 wildland firefighters. They're doing the same work as professional firefighters, wildland firefighters. Yet when they get released, they're kind of stripped of all those certifications and basically living in the world as felons without access to jobs, denied housing, denied public benefits, and they're sort of relegated to that really hard position to work from and having to build themselves back up. So that felt important. It felt like an important story to tell. Little did I know, we just found these incredible young men that were so honest and so vulnerable and so bright and funny and just wanted to open up and tell us their stories and work together. And there's several conversations we'd have with the youth. We'd come into a room like this and we would have them sit down, we'd light them, dramatic lighting, and it'd just be like it's like intimate one-on-one conversation with me and Drew, the co-director, and we would sit there and have these conversations with them and just kind of like ask them about their family life, ask them about what brought them here. We'd talk about their crimes. We weren't coming at it from a perspective like their crimes were something that defined them. It was let's address this so we understand your context, and then let's move on and understand what are the misconceptions people have about you. What are your hopes and dreams? We saw them as, there were all these dualities that exist here, right? So they're firefighters, they're also criminals, right? They're heroes, yet they're inmates. They're boys and they're men at the same time. They have to be 18 years old to get here, but they were incarcerated, most of them, when they were 15, 16 years old. So they've been just raised by the prison system, and they never had a chance to have a childhood, a late adolescence. So they were all trying to hold on to that. And so they're in this community with all these young men, it's open, all that gang stuff that existed in the institutions, they had to put that aside because they had to come together as a fire crew and actually work together to do something important, do something dangerous. They had a lot of mission zeal, they had a lot of positive energy towards it, and they got to serve their community and then get acknowledged for it. And for a lot of them, they've never been acknowledged for doing something positive in their lives. And so it was this transformative experience of seeing what they felt like they had become at that point. And we knew we had a longer story. We knew this was going to be something bigger. And then we met Chuy Hernandez, who is like the heart and soul of the film. So Chuy had been at Pine Grove, that's the name of the camp, I probably should have said that earlier, Pine Grove Youth Conservation Camp, the only fire camp in California that's staffed by juveniles. It was one of 42 camps at the time. Now it's only 35 camps. Pine Grove still exists. Has about 80 beds, as I've said, might be less at this point. But in 2015, when we met Chuy, he was the leader of Crew 3. There was 4 crews at camp, and Chuy was the longest serving first man in the 75-year history of the camp. Pine Grove is the first fire camp in California. It started in 1946, right after World War II. It was actually kind of, a lot of these camps started as prison camps that were grading roads. So, they had prisoners out there, chain gangs, on the roads, literally cutting them. So they had a grade so the water would drain off of them, and then they would cut those roads and grade those roads all over the state of California and all over the country. They use prisoners to do that work. They still call the work that they do daily. They do daily conservation work at the camp and work with CAL FIRE to clear ditches and cut more fire line and manage fuel all year round. And they call it grade work, which is kind of almost a tongue-in-cheek, kind of odd description that harkens back to this era. It really harkens back to the origins of prison labor exploitation, which all comes from slavery. And learning about this and then seeing sort of the modern manifestation of it, really let us know we were kind of telling the modern chain gang story. And when the youth are involved, I think something powerful is there because people will respond to youth. They're more hopeful. There's a lot more optimism. Even the guards and the CAL FIRE captains who were leading these crews would say similar things. They were like, yeah, we feel like we can help the youth. We feel like, they would hesitate to say they could save them, but they would use that language, which was pretty problematic in a lot of ways, because once they leave that space, those people aren't from that community. They're not from those Southern California communities. They're not from those communities of color that are really sending a lot of these young men to prison. So, all the fire captains are middle-aged white people who had been firefighters their entire lives, who lived in rural California. Yet they were like the stewards of these young men. So it was a really interesting environment, really interesting dynamics. And there are these characters like Chewie, who had been there for so long and were aspiring to become firefighters when they got out. And we knew they couldn't. We knew policy-wise, like legally, and based on the laws that would help them get parole and get their records expunged, there was no way they could actually translate that experience in fire camp into a career as firefighters after. And so we knew there was this sort of clear injustice that existed, and this conflict that was going to happen once Chewie, when he got released, which was planned at the end of 2016, we knew we could follow him and see that piece of the story. And so that's sort of our main initial storyline. And then we lost access in 2017 and 18 because the Public Information Office said, well, we only agreed to a short film. We're not going to let you come back and do the rest of this. So we kind of went on hiatus, did some follow-ups with guys after. Met a young man named Antonio Wellington, who was actually at Pine Grove in 2015 and 16 when we were filming with Chewie. And Antonio went on to get released shortly after Chewie got released, so end of 2016, beginning of 2017. Went back to Sacramento, where he's from, and kind of floundered for a year, but had gotten connected with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, which was a nonprofit in LA and Sacramento that supports formerly incarcerated communities, justice-involved people transitioning back to the community, helping them with housing and workforce opportunities, and really just building community. And so Antonio was getting mentorship there. He was mentoring other youth that were getting recently released, and he met a guy who was a U.S. Forest Service wildland firefighter who told him, you can apply. They're not going to look at your record. You have an opportunity. If you want to become a firefighter, I'll help you with the application. So he did, and in 2017, he got accepted to the U.S. Forest Service and became a professional firefighter. And we met him in 2018 after his first year fighting fire. And we're like, well, why didn't we just follow Antonio this whole time? Like, he was there. We could have just, this could have been the film. We could have been done. But we submitted another proposal to the U.S. Forest Service. They denied it. But Antonio introduced me to Chuck Supple, who was the new director of the Department of Juvenile Justice. And so I had pitched him the original story I wanted to tell, which was follow a young man who was incarcerated at the locked-out facilities. There was only 2 in Northern California in Stockton, and then 1 in Southern California. It's called Ventura. So there's NA Chatterjon in Stockton, and right across the street is OH Close, and those house most of the youth. And then there's 1 in Southern California called Ventura, and that's sort of the other sort of another full lockdown facility for youth in California. And so Chuck was the director of all of these, and we asked him, could we get back in there? And he's like, well, actually, Pine Grove is doing this program now where they're taking a couple of the correctional counselors to Pine Grove with a few guys who are there, and they're doing training sessions with groups in the lockdown facility to get them ready to transfer to Pine Grove. I was like, oh, that's interesting. He's like, yeah, we're calling it the PreCamp Program. I was like, all right, yeah, we'd love to see that. Let's follow that. And maybe out of that, we can follow a guy who qualifies, he gets transferred to Pine Grove. So we see the transformation of prisoner to training crew to firefighter, and that's our next story, and that could be the missing piece. So we had these 2 structures following Alex in prison to Pine Grove to becoming a firefighter, and Chewie at Pine Grove getting released, going home and trying to become a firefighter professionally and hitting all those barriers and challenges afterwards. And that became the story of FIREBOYS.
Very exciting. You can take a breath.
I was wondering if you could talk about your background from as far as your connection to Dallas. I mean, you grew up here, right? And then after high school, did you go to Oberlin? Is that what it was?
So I actually grew up in Youngstown, Ohio.
Okay.
I moved to Dallas about a year ago.
Oh, so you're not originally from here?
Not originally from here.
You live here now?
I do live here now, yeah. I live here now. I moved here to be close to family. My wife and I had a baby March 2nd of 2020, and 2 weeks later the country shut down. And so we were raising a baby. It wasn't that much different from just having an infant and being in isolation anyway, so we were like, well, this is our life now. And her parents had moved here about 7 years ago, so she wanted to be closer to them, and so in September of last year we moved down.
But he's now a local filmmaker.
Now I'm a local.
Because he's going to be involved with the Pegasus Media Project, which Todd will be hearing from me about that shortly.
All right.
But Jake, I saw in those guys, and I would say really Alex, I saw that they felt they had a purpose, that they were helping people, that they were seeing the signs that the little kids were holding up saying, you know, thank you to our heroes. And I mean, it just seemed to push them even more to do this hard work. And I was just really blown away by that, by watching them even subtly sort of change into what, we're heroes, you know. And I was also thinking about their hikes that they had to take. Was that you behind the camera taking those hikes with them? And like, how did you see them? I want to hear about that too.
The hiking?
Yeah.
So I'll kind of, I think their training is very rigorous. So part of qualifying for fire camp, they have to take a written test and they have to pass a test hike, which is about a 4-mile hike through the mountains.
No trails.
It's like a training ground, actually. It's like a CAL FIRE training ground that they use. So there are some trails. Some of it is wildland hiking, and they kind of go off and they'll say, okay, we're gonna go this way now.
Yeah.
But it's about a 4-mile hike. They have to pass it in an hour and 15 minutes, and they're not allowed to run. They're carrying a 50-pound pack, which is has a full fire shelter in it. There's actually a scene in the film where they have to they practice deploying their fire shelters. And so there's that, and there's water. I think they carry 5 or 6 liters of water because it's hot. You're working hard. They drink a lot of water. They have to drink a lot of water, and then usually like a 5-pound MRE with them as well. So and then a hand tool, usually like a McLeod or a Pulaski, sort of a cutting, scraping tool it's a specialized tool for wildland firefighting. And they have their helmet. They have Nomex, which is a flame-resistant, it's a burn-resistant material. It's like a bright orange or yellow for the captains and the U.S. Forest Service wear yellow or green. It's really light, actually, but underneath they wear cotton, and then they have heavy boots, all leather, heavy boots. So it's quite a lot. And we'd have to wear that when we go on the fires as well. So to go out there with them, we were out with them and the crews on these major incidences. So we had to get shelter trained. So that means one of the captains had to time us deploying a fire shelter in 60 seconds, and we had to pass that in order to qualify to go out with the fire crews. So we had a plan with the cameras where it was, all right, if we have time, we take the cards out, we put them in a pocket, and then we deploy our fire shelters. They also, when they do it in a group. So, 18, 20 people together in a crew, they'll kind of bundle together and look like a bunch of baked potatoes in a field. And they'll kind of get really close, and the fire shelters reflect 90% of radiant heat. So it's not the fire, the flame itself that burns you, it's actual radiant heat. You kind of get cooked. It's really brutal. It's already hot outside. So you're in that fire shelter, it'll save your life in a burnover. So they make sure that we know how to do that in case there's an emergency situation. And then I knew I was going to have to do a lot of hiking. I knew I was going to have to be out there with the crews. So I did a lot of training myself to just hike and do all that filming with them. So I did a lot of the hiking with them, filming, or Drew would, we'd find the strategic spots, and she would have a camera kind of catching them at the beginning and the end of some of the hikes. And when we were out on the field with them, we were both, I mostly run a shoulder rig. I kind of have developed verite observational style of shooting, so it's all very run and gun, embedded with the crews, very little interference, very little engagement. We'll ask questions, but mostly we're trying to just be present and let the story kind of unfold and be very prepared with kind of what we know we want to follow. And so we kind of would go into these situations with a plan and then be like, okay, the fire's over here now, we're just going to go there, or we're up on this ridge and they're they're cutting some chaparral and they're just throwing it into a pile, and then just a little plume of smoke in the distance, and they're like, that could be a problem. And then 20 minutes later, it's blown up into a huge fire that's coming over the ridge, and it's like, yeah, we got to go now. Go get your car. And I'm like, my car? It's behind that cloud of smoke. So I'm like running down a hill, like getting in the RAV4 or whatever the SUV we rented, and just hauling it back up the hill, getting out, and then filming them like the guys evacuating. So there's a few moments like that got pretty intense. But yeah, I had to be physically prepared. And had a lot of white knuckle drives through 2 tracks in the California wildland mountains behind, big firefighting vehicles full of, these young men. Yeah, it was quite an experience. I love it. I think I get, I'm not like much of an adrenaline junkie, but I think when the story was happening, it was very exciting because we were like, the film's called FIREBOYS, and I came up with the name, and like the first time I read the story, I was like, oh, this is the story. We've got to call it FIREBOYS, and it's like, this is perfect. But we can't have FIREBOYS without fire, so let's get out there.
So what did your wife think about this while you were?
Oh, that's a great question. So we met at Oberlin. She was a student. We graduated the same year. So we moved in together in 2014, and so 2015 I started the project. We were just, I guess, dating at the time. We had a house in Cleveland. Let's see. We got engaged the summer of 2015 and planned to get married October of 2016. And the week before the wedding, I was on a fire. Uh-huh. And so I came off the fire, and then 5 days later, I got married. She was like, don't burn your eyebrows off. And that's the only request. Gotta take pictures. Can't lose the eyebrows.
So she knew what she was getting into.
I think so. Yes. I didn't tell anybody. It's funny. We have to get with whole like background. With this filmmaking process and getting access to the prisons, I had to go to the California Film Commission and get a permit. It's special. It's a government property permit, which is very different than like just filming anywhere else. So I had to apply there, and they had to get it approved by the California Department of Corrections. And results back and forth. And they got to know me pretty well because they knew what we were doing, and I was sending them these proposals all the time. And I had a production company in Cleveland. It was really just for tax purposes, and I had business insurance. I had this great little boutique, insurance company that had just happened to have somebody that done all the underwriting for a production company, and so I wasn't paying much for it. And I'd send them these, certificates. I had to get certificates of insurance to prove I had insurance to like go film on a government property, right? Very like technical stuff. And the insurance company never saw the film, never saw a sample, never really asked about what exactly we were doing. And then maybe like we finished editing last year during the pandemic. It was an opportunity to, similar to Cheryl's, an opportunity to stay home, do the remote edit with our editor. And, we finished everything in really February of this year. We pretty much wrapped it up and did post-production. And then I sent it to my insurance company and be like, hey, what do you guys think of this? And we're looking for E&O and all this stuff. And they're like, oh, if we knew this is what you were doing, we would have probably tried to charge you a lot more for all the hazards you're going through. And I was like, oh, that was probably, yeah, I'm glad I didn't mention that. But you guys didn't ask, so.
Right?
Yeah, that was interesting. It was an interesting conversation. Yeah.
What kind of cameras did you take with you to do this that were so mobile? What did you use?
Yeah, we use the Canon C100s. They're compact. The ergonomics are good. You can use them handheld. I already had Canon lenses that were stabilized. I knew I'd be running around a lot, so I used stabilized lenses. And a lot of Canon L lenses, they're photo lenses, but they have weather seals on them, so I can keep the dust out of the sensor. And I knew that, so I was mostly shooting with some kit lenses. Not actually, all Canon sort of L photo lenses, and yeah, they held up really well. And then we had a sound guy, and he did. He had sort of a blimp the whole time because it was really windy. It's really hot, and that held up pretty well. And we would put the wind covers on our mics, and we would tape them with gaff tape at the base. So everything was sort of sealed up the best we could. And those Canon cameras also, they're vented. Right, it's not like a DSLR that doesn't have a vent, so they wouldn't overheat very well. And we were like, we're out there on the fire after the first one. We're like, that was crazy and really hot. What's the temperature that a battery can withstand before it explodes, right? And so we're like doing that research, like kind of in the field. And luckily, nothing like that happened. Some things overheat, and they would shut down, but nothing broke. Yeah, they really held up well. Yeah.
So tell us about your festival journey.
So we just had our world premiere at Dances with Films LA on September 11th. So I just came back from that. And we had a screening in New York, the Chain New York Film Festival. We won Best of Fest and Best Documentary in that festival, which was wonderful. Thank you. Let me see, I'm trying to remember all of them now. Next is Dallas, and then we are in the Chagrin Documentary Film Festival in Chagrin Falls, Ohio. Sort of that, connecting back to that community, and then we're in the Social Change Film Festival, Change Fest, Chicago. That's all going to be all virtual. Just got into Awareness Film Fest. We got into the Heartland International Film Festival in Indianapolis. The Napa Valley Film Festival is also virtual. We're going to be in that one. We're the opening night feature of the Santa Clarita Film Festival. So another LA festival. And we've already launched a social impact campaign with, we have an impact producer who's been working with us out of New York. She's from, we met her, she was a student at Columbia, and she started helping us kind of organize a lot of materials, helped us with the discussion guide. So we're in the process of sort of getting that published on our website to support a lot of the outreach work. So we've already partnered with a nonprofit, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, based in California. They're in LA. I have an LA home office and then a second office in Sacramento. And so they're doing a lot of policy work around reentry and some of the laws around parole and record expungement.
Have they seen this?
Yeah, so they were at the premiere. We invited them out, and they've seen it. And their former executive director is Scott Budnick. He's a producer, and he's been supporter of the film and helpful along the way. Hasn't really jumped on board more than just kind of helping us get connections. And so he introduced us to the ARC, and we've been working with them to kind of launch a more substantial campaign. And so we're trying to show the film to policymakers. They're doing proposals right now to bring a lot of programming to Pine Grove to help with the workforce development at the fire camp, to get the guys CPR certified or get them additional certifications so they can leave Pine Grove and go to the California Conservation Corps or the U.S. Forest Service, or get into a training program to be qualified for CAL FIRE work or other conservation jobs, because the future is going to be more fire. The future is going to be worse fires, and we need more people out there working, and there's a job force that wants to get those jobs. So we're hoping to help create real concrete pathways to employment after incarceration, and they're partnering with us to get the film from lawmakers and draft legislation. And so there's a lot of fun stuff happening there. It's really cool. The California Conservation Corps, we're connected with them as well. They're trying to develop more training grounds for workforce development and conservation, but they're recruiting from the institutions and from these fire camps. And so we're helping them bring the film to communities that might be resistant to opening up a camp that would be maybe potentially with a workforce of justice-involved people. And if they see the film, we've had situations where people have watched the film and said, "Oh, yeah, we want this. We want these guys here." Clearly, they're gaining a lot of purpose. They're gaining a lot of really good skills, and it's transformative in a lot of ways. I mean, they have my feeling, my sense was always, if you give somebody responsibility, they'll rise to the expectation, and when they're held back, they won't get much further than that, right? They kind of rise to whatever bar that's set for them, and if they can exceed that, great. And so I think fire camp holds them to a very high standard, and the guys tend to rise to it and meet it. And so that, I think it's proof enough that they're capable, and we hope that's what communities are seeing when they see the film, is that anybody given responsibility and some purpose, and then honored, acknowledged for that work, whether that's a paycheck or whether that's just a thank you, it is going to be affirming. And a lot of the work they do at fire camp is helping them come into their own power, and then have the ability when they leave to feel like they are capable of doing anything now because they fought fire. And so it's not just if they go into firefighting, they can just be more resilient out in the world because they've done something difficult.
And Alex and Chewy, do you have updates on them?
Yeah. So Alex attended the premiere on September 11th.
Oh, wow.
He got out a week ago, and we brought him down to go to the film. And he was in the audience, and there were like gasps. I mean, it was amazing.
That's great.
We got his brother and his brother's girlfriend to drive him down, and so the family, he had to be with his family. They've seen the film. They liked it, which was really good.
awesome.
We tried to get to the community as much as possible, and it was really powerful. So yeah, Alex was at the premiere. It was really special.
That's so cool.
And Chewy, I've been in touch with him a lot. He, as of December of 2020, he was working in a warehouse and really wanted to get back into firefighting. And so I introduced him to Bruce Sato, who's the director of the California Conservation Corps. And I'm proud to announce that as of June 2021, Chewy is a member of the Conservation Corps, and he was been fighting fire all summer.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, Chewy made it. We're very happy for him. He couldn't make it to the screening because somebody in his crew got COVID, so he's quarantined.
Yeah.
So,
That's awesome.
but he's doing great. Yeah, he's very.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's really worked out.
Is there anything else that you? Oh, I'm sorry. Were you about to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, so have any like fire associations or unions to get or anything? And is there anyone we could invite that might help in Dallas that could help to the screening that might be kind of like,
That's a great idea. Yeah, we've reached out to a lot of organizations, some publications. We got a little bit of traction, but not too much. It's been we cast a very wide net, and then we kind of had some follow-ups, but then again lost traction. I think there's one union and one organization in California that was connected, and I've connected with a lot of Conservation Corps branches. Cal Fire has seen it; they've approved and have made it available. All the prisons have seen it. We've sent it out to them. I think if anyone that's involved in reentry, workforce training, anti-recidivism work, or conservation, firefighting, I think there's a lot of crossover there, and in environmental justice to some degree as well. Yeah.